Hi, my name is Alex Leman. Welcome to Shadow Whispers, where silence speaks and the dark remembers. This is a place for those who don't just want to hear horror, but to feel it settle under the skin. Here, the fear isn't loud, it lingers, it waits. Some stories are true, some never should be, but all of them leave a mark. So, turn down the lights, trust no sound, and let's begin. Night. Loop. Chapter 1. The Black Archway. Tires shrieked on wet gravel as Ethan Carter swung the Jeep off Highway 19 into the forgotten service road that locals of Black Hollow, North Carolina, called the Night Loop. The dashboard clock flashed 9:47 p.m., but the forest outside seemed locked in an older, thicker midnight. Claire Prescott sat beside him, her arms folded tight, her profile ghost-lit by the glow of the GPS that had just lost signal. Their last argument still pulsed between them. Words unsaid, promises frayed. Yet Ethan's heartbeat quickened with something stronger than regret. He felt the mountain's breath, damp and pine-scented, slide through the half-open window like a warning and a dare. The road narrowed to a single lane, hemmed by spruce that leaned inward as if conspiring. Headlights cut tunnels in drifting fog, shapes darted at the edges, a broken fence post, a fallen sign, a pale root rising like an arm, each one flaring into existence before vanishing behind them. Claire's fingers trembled against the armrest, every jolt of the suspension magnifying the silence she kept. In that silence, Ethan replayed the warmth of her laughter from earlier in Asheville, wondered how quickly tenderness could turn brittle. He pressed the accelerator anyway, drawn forward by a thrill laced with self-reproach. The rain began without prelude, a cold scatter that grew into sheets. Wipers thudded, failing to sweep away the thickening veil. The air tasted metallic, as though the clouds hid iron rails waiting to clamp shut. Through the haze, the trees appeared taller, older, their trunks fluted like cathedral columns, their crowns lost in night. Moss shimmered silver on bark, and every limb seemed to twist toward the car, hungry for purchase. Ethan's spine prickled. He imagined roots probing the earth for something warm and breakable. An unexpected bend unfurled before them. A perfect black archway formed where two ancient hemlocks arched over the asphalt and fused crowns. Beneath that arch, the fog deepened into a gate of swirling charcoal. Ethan's pulse surged. The Jeep's high beams dove into the murk, yet failed to touch ground. The engine stuttered, a troubled cough, before settling into an uneasy idle. Instinct urged him to brake, but momentum, guilt, and a strange fascination kept his foot steady. Crossing the threshold, the world behind seemed to sigh shut. The sound of rain dulled, as though muffled by unseen drapery. Even the engine's roar felt distant, underwater. The odometer needle sagged, though his foot remained on the gas. Ethan sensed pressure in his ears, the hush of descending altitude though they climbed none, and with it came an ache in his chest, a heaviness that mirrored the weight in his heart. Beside him, Claire exhaled sharply, her breath fogging the windshield from within. He stole a glance and saw moisture bead at her lashes, whether from rain-damp air or the unspoken wound between them he could not tell. Ahead, the fog paled, revealing a brief widening in the road, a weedy pull-off where a rust-eaten payphone booth leaned at an impossible angle. Ivy clung to its cracked panes, and the handset dangled, swaying though no wind stirred. On the cracked concrete pad lay a single object, a heart-shaped locket, open, its empty halves catching the beam like two blind eyes. Ethan's chest tightened. The symbol felt staged, intimate, cruel. Claire's breath hitched, barely a sound, more a tremor in the air, yet it vibrated through him, awakening every raw edge of their fracture. He rolled past, but the Jeep's rear tires skidded as if nudged. Mirrors reflected nothing, yet his skin crawled with the certainty of unseen company. The forest pressed closer, branches knitting above, until sky vanished entirely. Raindrops struck the roof in arrhythmic taps, too slow for the storm, more like fingers drumming a patient message. Ethan's knuckles whitened on the wheel. Somewhere in the distance, a single owl cried, the note long and mournful, then cut short as though throttled mid-voice. The road pitched downward. Pools of runoff mirrored the headlights, each reflection distorting into a deeper, shifting black that seemed to ripple under its own power. Ethan's stomach coiled. Memories of childhood nights spent fearing closet shadows resurfaced, now wearing grown-up disguises. He felt Claire's tension escalate beside him, sensed her urge to speak, to break the cocoon of dread. Yet the history between them sealed her lips. Their shared silence became a living thing, stretching, crackling, ready to tear. A red glow bloomed through the fog, a traffic signal where no intersection should be. It hung suspended from a crooked cable strung between trees, swaying as though teased by invisible gusts that left the surrounding branches unmoved. The light lingered on crimson, drenching the interior in arterial color, setting Claire's features ablaze with sorrowful fire. Ethan's heart hammered. He tasted copper. Seconds dragged into an eternity until, without cycling to yellow, the light snapped off, plunging them back into monochrome night. In that instant, the GPS screen flickered, displaying a single word in jagged pixels: return. Panic throbbed at the base of Ethan's skull. Adrenaline demanded retreat, but the narrow road offered no room to turn. He pressed forward, forced to trust the single ribbon of blacktop as it vanished beyond the reach of light. Behind the car, darkness pooled like liquid obsidian, erasing every trace of the path they had taken. He wondered if reversing would bring him crashing into something that had not been there moments ago, something that matched their speed yet never showed its face. Lightning flared without thunder, revealing for a heartbeat the silhouettes of dozens of towering trunks ahead, each scored with deep horizontal gashes, as if multiple blades had licked the bark in one sweeping motion. The wounds glistened, fresh, sap bleeding pale in the flash. When darkness reclaimed the scene, Ethan felt those unseen scars pulse, synchronizing with his pulse, binding him to whatever force had marked them. Guilt for dragging Claire onto this route mingled with a fierce instinct to shield her from consequences he could not predict. Every mile they pressed on threatened to break something fragile between them. Trust, perhaps, or love itself. Yet stopping felt like surrendering her to the claws of the waiting night. Ethan swallowed the metallic taste of fear, forced the accelerator down, and steeled himself for what might lie beyond the next blind curve of the night loop. Chapter 2. First Traces. Rain slacked to a mist while the Jeep crawled along the descending grade, its high beams clawing at shadows that thickened like coagulating ink. The night loop began to serpentine between steeper ravines, and the ancient spruce pressed so close that branches scraped the roof with a hiss that sounded almost conversational. Ethan's pulse matched the metronome beat of the wipers, yet every shudder of the chassis fed a different rhythm inside him, one set to Claire's nearness, another to the mounting dread. He stole a glance. Her face remained a pale silhouette, but the way her shoulders tensed broadcast a barrage of thoughts she refused to voice. Guilt balled in his chest, heavy as river rock, because he knew this trip had been his last gamble to salvage what frayed between them. Without warning, the headlights struck a toppled cedar, stretching across the pavement like a barricade fashioned by the forest itself. Ethan braked hard. Gravel spat beneath the tires, and the Jeep shuddered to a halt inches from the trunk's moss-slick bark. Steam rose from the grill, mixing with mist, creating a luminous plume that drifted into the trees like a beacon for whatever might be watching. Instinct urged reversal, but the path behind had vanished into solid gray. Forward meant obstacles. Backward meant uncertainty. Both promised cost. Ethan cut the engine. Silence settled, uncanny in its fullness, broken only by the soft drip of rainwater from needles overhead. He pushed open the door and stepped onto asphalt filmed with pine needles that gleamed like wet copper. The air smelled of resin and something subtler. Ozone spiked with the sour trace of distant decay. Each breath felt too loud. Claire remained inside, hands knotted in her lap, eyes tracking him through the windshield with a mix of anger and unwilling concern. He rounded the front bumper to inspect the cedar. Sections of the trunk bore parallel slashes gouged deep into wood, as though enormous claws, or tools wielded with the same ferocity, had scored it before it fell. Sap bled along the grooves, luminous in the headlights' afterglow. The sight chilled him, but something else drew his focus. Inches beyond the trunk, in the soft margin where mud met road, lay a cluster of footprints. They were delicate, barefoot impressions, each toe defined, but wrong in proportion. Too long, too narrow, arches rising to an inhuman taper. The prints led from the woods, paused beside the tree, then disappeared beneath it, as if the body attached to them had slid under the cedar without breaking stride. Ethan's scalp tingled. The rational mind scrambled for explanation. Local kids, trick of moonlight. But the prints radiated freshness. Edges held their ridges as though pressed moments before. He crouched, fingertips hovering above the nearest indent, and felt heat emanating from the mud, a lingering warmth that suggested the walker still lingered nearby, breathing the same damp night air. The leaves behind him rustled softly. He straightened, heartbeat stumbling, and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, yet the sense of scrutiny intensified, as though the woods themselves had widened countless invisible eyes. Back at the Jeep, Claire opened her door and stepped out. Her boots splashed in a shallow puddle patterned with concentric ripples, but the ripples did not originate from her step. They already churned, pulsing outward from the center as if something had stirred the water earlier and it refused to settle. She noticed the prints, and her jaw tightened, sorrow warring with fear. Sorrow for the fractured bond with Ethan, fear that every mile deeper into these mountains pulled them further from the life they knew. She knelt near the tracks, strands of hair sticking to her cheeks, and lightly traced the outline of one print. Her fingertip came away smeared with a faint reddish film that resembled rust more than soil. Ethan exhaled shakily and moved to the cedar's tapered crown. Muscles burned as he tried to lever the trunk. The wood refused to budge. A fresh gust rattled branches above, showering them with droplets that felt unseasonably warm. Along the cedar's underside, something glinted. He reached beneath and withdrew a strip of glossy paper, candy wrapper bright with childish illustrations of a laughing clown. The wrapper had been folded into a neat triangle. Opening it revealed a smear of the same rust-colored residue and a single printed word, "Stay." A memory flashed. Years ago, Claire's love of roadside novelty candies during summer drives. He thrust the wrapper into his jacket pocket before she could see, protective reflex at odds with honesty. He sensed that acknowledging the message would tilt the balance between them toward irrevocable panic. Instead, he gestured to the obstructing trunk, signaling that they would need to clear a narrow path by sawing limb fragments or rolling segments aside. Claire nodded, yet her gaze lingered on the woods where the prints emerged, as if she expected the maker to step forth and claim ownership. Together they began dragging smaller branches. Every movement felt surveilled. Somewhere beyond the beam's reach, water dripped rhythmically. Not from rain, but from a source deliberate and measured, like footfalls turning liquid with each step. The sound circled. Echo slipped through trunks. It grew louder whenever they turned their backs to the dark, quieter when they faced it head-on. Claire's breath shortened, edges of panic fraying her composure. Ethan set a fallen limb aside and touched her elbow. Even without words, he asked forgiveness and offered resolve. She flinched under the contact but did not pull away, a fragile truce, trembling yet intact. Minutes dragged. The pile diminished. As Ethan rolled a final log toward the ditch, a flash of lightning froze the scene in stark clarity. For one suspended heartbeat, the forest beyond the road appeared crowded. Between every pair of trees stood a figure, tall, draped in shadow, faces obscured, an audience of silhouettes. Thunder never followed. The light flow of electrons seemed stolen solely to illuminate that tableau. When darkness returned, the roadside lay empty, yet the echo of presence throbbed in the marrow of their bones. The path now cleared enough for passage. Ethan urged Claire back into the jeep. She hesitated, sensing they might cage themselves in metal rather than escape. But the oppressive hush left no room for debate. Doors slammed, locks clicked, engine fired. As the vehicle eased over the cedar's flattened branches, Ethan glanced to the passenger seat. Mud flecked Claire's palms, and in her lap lay something new. The heart-shaped locket from the abandoned phone booth, its halves now sealed shut. They exchanged a single weighted look, and any illusion that the mountain's threats were random dissolved. Something had singled them out, and it had left its first unmistakable traces. Chapter 3: Whispers in the Dark. The jeep crawled uphill, engine rasping as if the mountain sapped horsepower with every yard. Black, hollow forest hemmed the single-lane track, and fog rolled in low whirls that burst against the grill like ghostly surf. Claire's pulse thudded inside her throat. She studied the sealed locket in her palm, its metal strangely warm despite the chill that seeped through the glass. The smell of wet moss thickened, mingling with something coppery, and her mind flicked to the prints beside the cedar, too slender, too deliberate, as if the night had stretched human feet into tools for stalking. She closed her fist, but the warmth intensified, an accusation she could not escape. Ethan stared ahead, knuckles marble pale on the wheel. Thoughts spiraled. The candy wrapper warning, the ranks of silhouettes, the way Claire had flinched beneath his touch. Regret tangled with protectiveness. He considered braking, speaking, turning back, yet each idea felt like surrender to whatever choreographed this nightmare. The headlights washed over mossy culverts and half-collapsed guardrails, revealing nothing alive, but the cabin vibrated with an infrasound hum that prickled skin. When he glanced at the rear view, the road behind seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with the jeep's every shudder. Rain returned in pinprick bursts that peppered the windshield, then died. In their place came a hush, dense and velvety. Claire leaned forward, eyes wide, sensing a shift. Air currents inside the jeep altered. Cool draft replaced by tepid exhalations, as though unseen lungs shared the cab. She pressed fingertips to the dash. Plastic pulsed beneath her touch, rhythmic, subtle. A phantom heartbeat syncing with her own. A murmur blossomed from the speaker grills. No music played, and the radio lay dark, yet voices seeped out, distant and overlapping, syllables rubbing together like dead leaves. Ethan stiffened, volume knob frozen under his hand. The words lacked clarity but carried cadence, soft, coaxing, threaded with promise and threat. Claire swallowed hard, recognizing her name woven through the Babel, pronounced with fragile tenderness, then sharpened to a command. She pictured mouths moving in the dark forest, lips cracked by cold, calling her closer. The jeep rounded a hairpin curve and the whispers surged, filling the cabin in a rush that pressed against eardrums. Ethan's heartbeat pounded. He tasted adrenaline on the back of his tongue. Static crackled across the dashboard, and the digital clock reset to 00, numbers blinking in silent alarm. Claire's gaze locked on the passenger window. Between swipes of the wiper blade, condensation formed symbols, spirals intersecting with crude stick figures. Each spiral split, writhing like fresh ink, until the glass spelled Ethan's name beside hers, the letters drifting out of alignment as if tugged by tiny invisible hooks. Panic coaxed memories. The summer they camped beneath clear Tennessee skies, exchanging vows to never let silence grow between them. Now, silence corrupted itself into voices of strangers who somehow knew every secret they had buried. Claire's chest tightened with grief for simpler nights, but the grief mutated into anger, at Ethan for choosing this road, at herself for following, at the forest for prying into the private contours of their love. She reached to wipe the window. The glass burned her skin, and the symbols vanished beneath her smear as though never there. Ahead, a wooden bridge emerged, its planks slick with algae, guardrails rotted to lace. A culvert beneath carried a swollen creek that pulsed with murky swirls. As tires thumped onto wood, the whispers retreated, replaced by a low chant rising from beneath the bridge, a subterranean choir speaking in measured tempo. Vibrations traveled up through metal, into seats, into marrow. Ethan felt every syllable as a throb at the base of his spine, counting down to something unavoidable. He pressed the accelerator, the engine coughed, faltered, then steadied. Halfway across, the chant ceased, an abrupt vacuum that left his ears ringing. Claire's gaze snapped to the side mirror. In the reflection, water under the bridge boiled, sending up bubbles that broke with soft pops. From each burst, vapor rose and coalesced into small human shapes made of mist, featureless yet intimate in posture. Two figures standing close, foreheads nearly touching. A vision of the couple they once were. The shapes drifted with the jeep's movement, tethered by longing. As the rear wheels hit earth on the far side, the forms collapsed, sucked back into the torrent. Wind sliced through cracked seals, carrying a new scent. Lavender mixed with rot. The perfume Claire wore on their first date, soured by damp decay. It seeped into upholstery, into clothing, into lungs. Ethan's eyes watered. Memory clashed with nausea. The whispers returned, no longer diffuse but focused, intimate, breathy against the shell of an ear. Each voice spoke single words, regret, guilt, stay, then merged into a drawn-out sigh. The sigh lasted impossibly long, curling around their hearts, squeezing until Claire's vision clouded and Ethan's foot eased off the gas, spirit trembling with the impulse to yield. At that moment, the locket in Claire's lap clicked open by itself. Inside lay a shred of the candy wrapper, folded into a perfect heart, the rust stain blooming wider like fresh blood. The radio crackled once more. All sound cut. Static subsided. They found themselves rolling through absolute quiet, broken only by their ragged breathing. Yet, beneath that quiet lingered the sensation of countless mouths poised an inch from skin, waiting for the next breath to resume their litany. Claire slammed the locket shut, but the faint echo of the click resounded through the forest, bouncing tree to tree, as if the woods recorded the moment and played it back on endless loop. Leaves quivered, though no wind stirred. Ethan accelerated, desperate for distance. The Jeep surged forward, headlights spearing fog that thickened into a living wall. For an instant, the beams illuminated a narrow footpath veering left into darkness. Barefoot prints shimmered along its edge, wet and new, leading deeper into unseen depths. As the road curved away, a final whisper slipped through the vents. One syllable, stretched thin as gossamer, home. The word lingered behind them like a hook in flesh, tugging at resolve, at memory, at the bond fraying beneath whispered knives. Ethan gripped the wheel until joints ached. Claire pressed a hand to the warm metal over her heart and wondered which path truly led home now that the forest had learned their names. Chapter 4. The Hooded Shape. Headlights flared against an abrupt curtain of darkness as the Jeep burst from the fog and skidded onto a plateau of cracked asphalt. Ahead, a tall figure in a hooded cloak stood motionless at the center of the road, the fabric pooling like spilled ink around bare feet. Ethan's reflex slammed the brake. Rubber screamed, momentum wrenched both bodies forward, and the engine rattled into a stunned idle. In the sudden stillness, every raindrop seemed to hang mid-air, suspended by the gravity of the encounter. Tense seconds elongated. The cloak absorbed the beams, swallowing light without reflection, creating a hole where color and depth should have existed. No breath, no twitch, no face, only the suggestion of calamity draped over bone. Ethan's heartbeat pounded behind his eyes. Terror mingled with a fierce urge to shield Claire from the unknown. Memories of their early devotion, the way she once fell asleep against his shoulder under July fireworks, flashed like dying embers, threatened to snuff beneath the chill winds of this moment. He felt the fragile residue of their intimacy quiver. One more thing the night could steal. Claire's fingers dug into the dashboard, nails cutting plastic grooves that bled white dust. Fight or flight warred against the deeper ache of recognition that their relationship, already cracked, might not survive what loomed outside. The air inside the Jeep thickened, every molecule charged with static. Strands of her hair lifted as though searching for escape routes. She sensed the hooded presence measuring them in silence, mapping hidden fractures in their resolve. Ethan wrested the gear into reverse, yet the tires refused to roll. The Jeep seemed rooted to the road, pinned by unseen weights. A pressure blossomed in the cabin, compressing lungs, compressing memories, until even guilt felt too heavy to carry. Outside, the cloak rippled once, a subtle shift against windless air. From beneath the hem, thin streams of dark water trickled, spreading across asphalt like veins. Each rivulet moved with intent, drawing filigreed paths that twisted toward the Jeep's wheels and curled around the rubber in tightening loops. Panic flared in Ethan, a white-hot flare eclipsed by sudden hush. The forest swallowed all sound save the low clatter of the cooling engine. He shoved the door, intent on confronting or fleeing, but hinges groaned and halted halfway, as if an invisible hand held it shut. Claire's gaze fixed on the cloak's folds, where faint pulses of red glimmered. Slow, deliberate, in cadence with her own racing pulse. She tasted metal on her tongue, the flavor of fear fused with longing for a future slipping further from reach. An unexpected motion yanked their attention upward. Strung between two skeletal maples, a line of rusted cable rattled to life, hoisting an ancient railroad bell that had hung unnoticed in shadow. The bell began to sway, moved by no physical force, and spilled a single resonant clang that reverberated through timber and nerve endings alike. With that toll, the figure lifted an arm. The sleeve's interior showed no flesh, only depthless dark. The gesture lacked menace yet carried authority, an invitation to witness something they could never unsee. In that raised hand hovered the heart-shaped locket, stolen from Claire's lap without touch. The hinge creaked open by unseen will, exposing the stained wrapper heart. A gust blew through the cabin though the windows remained closed, scattering maps and receipts into a cyclone that circled their heads. On each scrap of paper fresh ink bloomed, inscribing dates that matched milestones of their relationship. First kiss, first fight, day of proposal, and beside each date a second notation appeared. A grim subtraction etched in the same rust hue that marked the cedar. -1, -1, counting down. Lightning forked behind the figure, silhouetting the cloak against the sky, and revealing rows of other shapes lining the tree line. Hooded kin, perfectly still, countless. In the electric flash, Claire glimpsed the edges of her own shadow on the windshield, but the shadow did not mimic her posture. It raised its hands in surrender, head bowed, staging a betrayal of flesh by ink. The sight shredded her composure, unleashing tears that cut hot tracks down chilled cheeks. She yearned to seize Ethan's hand, to anchor them together, yet pride born of earlier wounds kept her palms clenched on empty air. The bell tolled again. Asphalt beneath the Jeep vibrated, the dark rivulets tightened into constricting bands, gripping tires, axle, frame. Ethan's world narrowed to the distance between dashboard and hooded form. Resolve crystallized within him. If the mountain demanded tribute, it would not claim Claire. He rammed the accelerator. The engine roared, steel strained. Smoke churned from the wheel wells where rubber burned against the tar's choking grip. For a heartbeat, nothing yielded. Then the shackles of liquid shadow snapped, bursting into plumes of icy mist. The Jeep lurched forward, fissures fracturing the road like spreading lightning. As they shot toward the cloak, the figure remained placid, arms lowering, locket still suspended in midair. A third bell strike collided with metal and bone, and headlights shattered into blooming sparks, plunging everything into feral night. Ethan felt impact, but not with flesh or cloth, only with a cold emptiness that folded around the vehicle like velvet. The Jeep burst through, wheels juddered on torn pavement, and when Ethan risked a glance into the rear view, the road lay vacant. The bell silenced, the hooded crowd dissolved, yet the locket floated inches behind the tailgate, keeping pace, its seam yawning wider as though waiting to close upon them both. Chapter 5. The Mad Dash. The Jeep barreled down the broken mountain road, shredded headlights casting ragged cones that fluttered like dying moth wings. Ethan's foot pressed the accelerator flat to the floor, yet every jounce of the suspension felt sluggish, as if gravity thickened behind them. Night air roared through fractured glass and stitched icy lashes across his cheeks. In the rear view, the heart-shaped locket drifted 2 feet above the tailgate, revolving slowly, its halves gaping wider with each rotation, an iron maw measuring the distance to their hearts. Forest raced past in a fever blur. Trunks streaked white, undergrowth rippled silver, and moonlight strobed through fractured canopy like prison bars sliding over their faces. Claire braced against the dash, knuckles chalk white, pulse hammering behind her eyes. Terror braided itself with a fierce love she had almost forgotten, and the strands pulled taut inside her ribs. Every scrape of branch against crumpled fender reminded her how close she had come to leaving Ethan in silence weeks earlier, and how absurd that quiet feud felt against the scream of this night. Wind whipped pages of the scattered mementos still swirling inside the cab. Dates and deductions bled rust onto upholstery, forming rivers that merged into a single number etched across the roof liner, 0. Claire stared, understanding that someone, or something, had decided their ledger was due. The Jeep fish-tailed. Ethan wrestled the wheel, tires spitting gravel that sparked when it struck the undercarriage. Behind them, the locket snapped shut, its clack sharper than gunfire, and the Jeep lurched forward as if released from a hook. At that moment, the road split without warning. Left dropped into a narrow gulch where fog brewed thick as milk. Right climbed a ridge traced by the skeletal remains of a guardrail. Ethan chose elevation, instincts screaming that higher ground meant air, perspective, maybe dawn. The climb punished the engine. Pistons rattled, temperature spiked. Steam feathered from the crumpled hood, mingling with pine-scented mist that now reeked of smoldering sugar, the same carnival sweetness that once marked carefree afternoons and now curdled in memory. Halfway up the incline, the hillside beside them shifted. A procession of hooded silhouettes moved parallel through the trees, their pace effortless, feet never seeming to break forest floor. They glided in unison, cloaks billowing in wind that never touched the branches. At each rise of the Jeep's pistons, the figures turned their veiled faces toward the vehicle, and the darkness beneath those hoods flickered crimson, like embers caught in a draft. Ethan's stomach hollowed, convinced a single misaligned heartbeat would invite them to step onto the road. A fallen pine blocked the crest. Instinct overrode fear. Ethan swerved into the drainage ditch, wheels rattling over stones, chassis shrieking. The Jeep vaulted clear of the trunk, landing with a spine-snapping jolt on the far side. Shock slammed through their bodies, yet Claire's hand shot out, anchoring on Ethan's thigh in a reflex born of years of shared road trips and whispered confidences. The contact cracked something frozen between them. Warmth pulsed where her fingers dug through denim. He felt it as a promise that survival re-threaded their bond even as the night gnawed at its seams. Beyond the crest, the mountainside opened into a slate plateau littered with rusted machinery. Abandoned coal tipples and conveyors lit by moonlight into skeletal giants. Ethan floored the gas across the flat, dodging metal carcasses whose shadows clawed the Jeep's paint. Somewhere in the maze a siren wailed, a mining alarm, long defunct, now awakened to howl like a grieving animal. The note spiraled through steel beams, disorienting direction. Claire's ears rang. Tears sprang unbidden from the frequency, mingling fear with an aftertaste of regret for every lost chance to say, "I love you," when daylight still felt infinite. The plateau ended at a severed trestle spanning a ravine. Half the bridge remained, half yawned into darkness where a cataract thundered unseen. Ethan slammed the brake. Tires screeched along loose shale, stopping inches from splintered timbers. Steam belched under the hood. The engine ticked, exhausted. He scanned for any route other than back the way they came. Only the ravine offered passage, its void trembling with spray and moon-fractured water 40 feet below. Behind them, the locket floated into view, hovering at eye level through the shattered rear window. Its polished surface reflected Ethan and Claire, not huddled in the Jeep, but standing on opposite banks of a river, arms outstretched yet unable to close the gap. The image rippled, warped, then dissolved into black. The locket split open once more. Inside now lay a single sliver of mirror that caught the moon and cast a needle of light onto the ravine mouth, illuminating an old service track carved into the cliff's far side. The beam quivered like a heartbeat, inviting them to trust the signpost of their tormentor. Choice stranded them on the brink. Return down the mountain into a parade of cloaked shapes, or launch into a cliffside tunnel mapped by an artifact that measured their love in subtractions. Claire met Ethan's gaze, anguish and resolve intertwining like two currents smashing against a common rock. He breathed her name in his mind, silent yet thunderous, and threw the Jeep into reverse, preparing for the next desperate gamble. Metal groaned, rubber squealed, and the quarry of night held its breath, waiting to see which thread would snap first, the road beneath their wheels or the bond between two battered hearts. Chapter 6. Restless Infinity. Reverse gear jolted the Jeep toward the cliff's lip, back tires skimming loose shale that rattled like teeth in a tin coffin. The service track the Locket's beam revealed lay 30 feet below, hacked into limestone and slick with runoff. Ethan feathered the brake. Gravel cascaded over the edge in silvery arcs, clattering into darkness. Engines groaned in protest, but fear of what waited behind pressed harder than gravity. He wrenched the wheel, nosed the vehicle toward a half-collapsed access ramp, and the Jeep plunged, bouncing end over suspension while Claire clenched the grab bar so fiercely her nails cracked. The landing compressed shocks to metal shrieks, yet held. Forward momentum carried them onto the ledge, tires grinding through ruts carved by forgotten mining carts. Overhead, the ravine's opposing wall loomed as a jagged silhouette, blotting half the sky. Moonlight filtered through fractured clouds, painting the gorge in bruised lavender. In that glow, the Locket still hovered outside the rear window, its hinge glowing ember red, guiding their descent like a lantern carried by unseen hands. The track funneled into a tunnel mouth where corrugated steel ribs buckled inward, forming a throat of rust and dripping calcium. The moment the Jeep passed beneath, headlights died, devoured by a darkness thicker than any night on the surface. Only the Locket's ember kept depth at bay, flickering like a dying star. Ethan's gut twisted with the knowledge that every foot forward extended beyond cartography. No GPS, no satellite, only instinct and machinery that already tasted of death. Brake lines hissed under strain, echoing down the shaft in metallic whispers that mimicked human breath. Inside, air clung damp and warm, alive with molecules of coal dust that glittered when sparks from the undercarriage struck stone. Claire's lungs burned, every inhale scouring her throat with bitter grit. The tunnel narrowed without warning. Wooden support beams angled inward, forcing the mirrors to scrape and screech. Wood splintered, showering the windshield with shards that caught the Locket's glow like fleeting constellations. Beneath the Jeep, puddles hissed into steam. Some pools rippled before the tires touched them, as though disturbed by something passing just ahead. A new noise blossomed, steady, rhythmic, subterranean. Boots pacing in step with the Jeep's speed. The sound came from above, from below, from the seams between boards. Ethan's mind conjured cloaked figures marching on parallel paths, shadow battalions mirroring every desperate push on the accelerator. His chest tightened until each heartbeat felt stolen rather than earned. Beside him, Claire pressed her hand to the glove box where the wrapper dates and deductions had pooled into a single wet smear. She realized the tally had never measured events. It had measured distance to surrender, and now the counter rested at 0. The tunnel spat them into an open chamber, a defunct loading cavern whose ceiling had collapsed to reveal strips of cloud-streaked sky. Shafts of moonlight revealed relics, toppled ore carts, chain hoists swaying on invisible wind, chalk markings of production quotas long forgotten. In the largest beam of light stood a hooded figure, its cloak stitched from black void and ash. Unlike its silent kin on the road, this one raised a pair of bone-thin arms, palms skyward, as though summoning judgment. The Locket shot forward, embedding itself in the figure's chest where it glowed brighter, veins of red coursing through fabric until the entire silhouette pulsed like a molten heart. Ethan swerved, clipping a cart that spun into sparks. Molten flecks peppered the cloak. Yet the figure remained unmoved, eyes invisible, presence absolute. The Jeep dodged through a gap and roared toward an exit ramp hewn at a steep angle. Tires slithered on scree. Engine screamed. Dashboards rattled. Claire's gaze locked on the rear view. The chamber stretched behind them in impossible elongation, the figure receding but never diminishing, as if distance bent around it like warped glass. At the tunnel's far mouth, night air burst in, frigid and clean. They shot onto a paved county road edged by streetlights and reflector posts, the mundane infrastructure of safety. Pavement thrummed beneath tires, and for a scarce heartbeat silence returned. No whispers, no tolling bell, only the wind's honest howl through fractured windows. Relief erupted in Claire's chest, raw and bright, then dimmed when she looked down. The wrapper heart lay open on her thigh, unstained, pristine, as if freshly folded. The first streetlight flickered out as they passed, dropping its pool of radiance into black. 50 yards later, the next lamp died, then the next, dominoes of darkness falling behind them, chasing taillights that bled crimson streaks into the void. Ethan's trembling hands tightened on the wheel. The odometer rolled back a mile, then another, numbers retreating toward zero with every second, erasing evidence that escape had ever been possible. The clock blinked shower once more, froze, and extinguished. Claire's phone lit unbidden, screen blank except for a single notification. Incoming call, home. But home no longer existed on any map she trusted. She let the device slip to the floor, the glow dying as it fell. Heartbeats overlapped, his and hers, weaving a fragile tether in a world unraveling. Somewhere beyond the hood, a horizon should have eased into dawn, yet the sky remained locked in perpetual midnight. Clouds circling a point directly above the roof like water spiraling a drain. The Jeep continued south along the county road. No intersections, no signs, no break in the tree line, only a ribbon of asphalt unspooling ahead and rolling itself back behind in solemn, endless loop. Ethan and Claire sat side by side, breaths aligning, hands inches apart on cracked leather. Between them hovered a silence so dense it felt liquid, ready to swallow words, apologies, and vows alike. Behind them, somewhere in the distance, yet impossibly near, a bell tolled a single note, then another, marking time in a place where time had lost meaning. The sound followed them down the center of the vanished highway, promising company for as long as the road chose to remember their names.